The day they caught the thief, they did not call the police. In Greenhill, some justice is too personal for handcuffs. It is a thing of the soil, of the blood, of the hot, quick pulse of a community wronged. They tied Daniel to the old baobab tree in the square. Its bark was like the skin of a 1,000-year-old chief, gnarled and wise and unforgiving. The rain came first, a cold mercy. Then came the stones. Let the sky judge him. Old Kofi's voice cut through the storm, sharp and thin with the pain of a missing goat. Let the rain wash the evil away. Daniel, blood and rainwater stinging his eyes, said nothing. The ropes bit into his wrists, a brutal echo of every lock he'd ever picked. His mother's ghost whispered in his ear, a memory from a time when his hands were clean. My son, be like the river that carries life, not like the river that drowns. He had become a flood. And now he would drown. They said Daniel's shadow could steal a whole market and leave the town counting nothing but silence. He moved like the harmattan wind, invisible, dry, leaving everything dusty and empty in his wake. He was tall, built with the broad shoulders of a man who should have been working the fields, not slinking through alleys. Even the animals knew. The goats would stop their bleeding and step aside. The hens would scatter into the brush, as if they understood the primordial danger of crossing his path. By day, he wore the shame of his mother's threadbare coat as she sold yams by the dusty roadside, her smile a fragile mask for a universe of worry. By night, he wore the name the market whispered when a radio went silent or a purse went light: shadow. Hunger sang a louder song than shame. A gnawing, relentless ache for more than just food, for respect, for power, for a life that didn't smell of dust and desperation. Pride was a fine, expensive cloth he wore over his dirty secret. His mother's words found a home in him, but they were a quiet room in a loud house. He remembered her stories of the old days, of grandfathers who traded with distant towns, where respect was like cola nut, shared and returned. But after she died, the story stopped. The cola was not shared. Her death opened a cold, empty space inside Daniel where grief and a hot, untamable anger met and shook hands. They began to trade in things that should never be bought or sold with another man's pain. Prison hardened him like sun-baked clay. He returned not reformed, but remade into something sharper, more dangerous. His smile had edges now. He walked with a new, coiled tension, a different kind of hunger planted deep behind his eyes. His hands, when still, would sometimes move with a subtle, unconscious memory. The twist of a lock, the testing of a window's give, the cold feel of metal. He would say to anyone who would listen, and to those who wouldn't, I was born poor and I won't die poor. Depending on the ear that heard it, it sounded like a desperate promise or a chilling threat. But at night, when the moon leaned in close and the road was empty, the ghosts came. He could not sleep. He could not drink the guilt away. He moved through his life like a thief who carried not only stolen goods, but the invisible, weightless ghosts of the people he had stolen from. The plan for the big robbery in Brookfield was born in whispers. It passed through the market stalls where women sold pungent palm oil, and it grew in the purple, cooling shade under the ancient baobab tree. The plan was simple, elegant in its audacity. A wealthy trader, known to keep his wealth at home. A late-night entry. Pockets that had never known the hollow ache of true hunger. For Daniel, it was more than a job. It was another chance to finally change the shape of his life, to fill its hollows with the solid weight of stolen coin. He gathered his gang, their faces eager in the dim light. This time, he told them, his voice low and intense, we take enough to change everything. For good. Some nodded, their eyes bright with a future their own hands could not earn. Others, like Daniel, hid their trembling beneath a forced, nervous laugh. That night, the world felt like a tight, constricted thing, a series of narrow alleys, small, dark windows, and held breaths. The air was different here in Brookfield. It smelled of money and quiet security. They moved like shadows through the compound, their feet silent on the packed earth. But the house itself held a different secret. The trader was awake, moving quietly in the dimness. His wife had just born a child, and the house was filled with the sacred smell of boiled water, fresh linen, and new life. The intruders moved with practiced silence until a single, clumsy moment. A foot connecting with a pot left in the kitchen. The clang was like a gunshot in the silent night. A man looked up from the cradle he was rocking, his eyes blurry with exhaustion but sharp with the instant, protective instinct of a parent. Candlelight found them, glinting off a watch, widening an eye. A shout, raw and loud, cut the air. The sound of trouble travels fast in a village, carried on the night air itself. The villagers, faithful to the alarm, came not with questions, but with answers, torches that threw wild, dancing shadows, and thick sticks pulled from the woodpile. Chaos erupted. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He ran, instinct taking over, but life has a way of finding the weak place a man leaves behind. His leg, driving forward in blind panic, found a nail jutting from a broken fence post. It tore through muscle and held him fast, an animal in a trap. His gang, seeing him caught, dissolved into the night, leaving him behind like a forgotten bruise. The justice of the mob is swift and unforgiving. They beat him with a cold fury, the pain a white-hot explosion that erased thought, erased hope, erased everything but the primal will to endure. When their arms grew tired, they dragged him to the square and tied him to the great mango tree, the ropes biting cruelly into his wounded flesh. The town gathered, arguing about his fate in heated, overlapping voices. Some, their faces contorted with rage, wanted blood, a final, brutal payment. Others, fearful of the law they had just bypassed, argued for the police. Then, as if in answer to their argument, the rain came. It did not drizzle. It fell in great, solid sheets, a torrent from the heavens. Thunder rolled over them, a sound of such immense power that it silenced the crowd. People fled, scattering to their homes, as if the sky itself could not stand to look at the knot of sin and shame tied to the tree. Daniel was left alone, the rain a cold hand washing the blood from his face, stinging his wounds. He had expected the village to finish him, but he had not expected the sky to cover his shame with such a violent, purifying water. He surrendered then. He thought it would end there, beneath the soaked fiber of his life. He thought the world would forget him as easily as a wet rag left by the roadside. At dawn, when the town was hushed and exhausted, and the rain had softened to a drizzle, the puddles in the square lay like old, broken mirrors reflecting a gray sky. A hooded figure moved through the mist, a silent phantom in the aftermath. It went to the tree and, with a sharp knife, sawed through the wet ropes. Daniel, barely conscious, slumped forward. Strong arms caught him, held him up. No words were exchanged. The figure half carried, half dragged him along hidden paths, through streams and thickets, leaving Greenhill far behind. He was left at the gate of a different town, Oakridge, like a seed dropped by a bird in unknown soil, left to see if something new could take root. He woke to a world of softness. The smell of wood smoke and something cooking, something good and wholesome. The feel of a clean mattress beneath him. The soft, shuffling steps of people trying to be quiet. He opened his eyes to the concerned faces of Pastor John and his wife. Their hands were not fists. They were full of a kindness he had long ago dismissed as weakness. They found him at their gate, more dead than alive, and did what his own town had refused. They carried him inside and began the slow, patient work of healing. Pastor John was not a man of flashy sermons or loud prayers. His power was in his steady quiet, in the certainty of his presence. He looked at Daniel, this broken, brutalized stranger, and called him son. The word landed in Daniel's chest with the force of a physical blow, breaking something open and letting something else lift away. Overwhelmed by a shame he couldn't articulate, afraid his past would rove and find him even here, Daniel told the first lie of his new life. "My name," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse, "is Chris." It was a small name, a safe name, one he hoped would be easily forgotten. Pastor John simply smiled. "Chris. A strong name. It means God is strength." The lie settled into the house, an uninvited guest that promised to stay too long. Grace, the pastor's wife, moved with a quiet efficiency. She took to Daniel with the unconditional care of a mother who did not ask for identification or proof before offering bread. She did not see a thief deserving of chains. She saw a man, cold and broken, in need of warmth. As he healed, Daniel worked for them. He mended the fence with hands that remembered how to break. He swept the yard clean of dust he felt he had brought in. He fetched water from the slow, meandering river, the heavy buckets a penance his muscles understood. He helped Grace with her corn business by the road, and for the first time, he learned the honest weight of coin earned by sweat and sun, not fear and darkness. It felt different in his palm. Heavier. Yet, every time he passed the small ruined church on the hill, his steps would slow. Its roof had caved in, its walls were scarred by weather and time. It was a skeleton of faith. And at night, he would slip away from the pastor's house to pray in that shattered silence, where the ghosts of hymns once lived. He prayed with the hands that had stolen, to a God he had openly mocked, for a chance he knew he did not deserve. The pastor's daughter, Anna, watched him with eyes that missed nothing. She was not cynical, but she was clear-eyed. She had the look of someone who asked difficult questions not because she liked trouble, but because she believed the truth was a thing that needed to be kept clean and out in the open. Her suspicions of the quiet, intense stranger they called Chris grew like a whisper under a blanket. She read the small, telling signs. The way his fingers twitched almost imperceptibly when someone mentioned a lost object, the way he flinched, just for a heartbeat, at the sight of a tied rope or a locked box. She asked him once, her voice blunt and direct as a well-used axe, "Who are you really?" Daniel, the old instincts flaring, lied again. The words came smooth and easy. Shame is a slow teacher, but it gives a man 100 clever tongues to defend himself. When he lied, Anna did not shout or accuse. She simply nodded, her eyes holding his for a moment too long. She continued to watch him work, to listen not to his words, but to the quiet that lived in his chest. The turning point came on a quiet afternoon while he was cleaning the broken pews in the ruins of the church. His hand, brushing away years of dust and decaying hymn sheets, touched something buried. It was a small bag made of cracked, dry leather, ordinary and meant to be forgotten. Inside, the past waited for him. A wristwatch, its hands frozen at a forgotten hour. A necklace with a simple pendant. 2 gold rings. And a faded envelope, addressed to a name, Thomas. The sight of these things was a splinter driven directly into his mind. Memory, the thief he had tried to outrun, returned for its own reckoning. He remembered this hall. It was from years ago. A small, tidy house on the edge of Greenhill. An old man, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow with a fresh grief. His wife had just passed. Daniel, high on his own daring, had taken these last, precious reminders. The man, Thomas, had died soon after. The town said it was heartbreak that had finally taken him. Daniel's chest clenched tight, as if someone had wrapped his heart in a fist of rope and was pulling. He had not just stolen things, he had robbed a man of his memories, of his anchors to a love that was gone. He had shattered a life already cracking under the weight of loss. With trembling hands, he dug a small, deep hole at the base of an Iroko tree behind the church. He reburied the bag, but not before he wept over it, great, heaving sobs that came from a place deeper than pain. He wept like a man who was finally learning how to kneel. He went to the river and scrubbed his hands over and over, watching the water cloud with dirt, wishing it could just as easily wash the stain from his soul. He whispered a promise to himself, to the God he was beginning to believe might be listening, that he wanted to do better. The hands that had stolen were slow to change their nature, but they began to change their purpose. They began to feed. They began to build. They began to teach. He started with the younger boys of Oakridge who hung around with nothing to do, much like his old gang. But instead of teaching them to take, he showed them how to carve simple stools from wood, how to mend a leaky roof, how to plant yams so the soil would yield a bounty for the next farmer. Pastor John watched this and told him, "Let your hands restore what your past destroyed." The words pressed into Daniel like seeds into good soil. He worked with a furious, focused energy, not for praise, but because the work itself seemed to scrub away some of the old blackness inside him. The boys learned from him and liked how gentle his large, feared hands could be with a piece of wood. He began to sleep without the same sharp terror that had kept him walking the nights. The guilt was still there, but it sat by the door now like a patient dog, It no longer ate him alive. Yet he kept his lie. The name, Chris, was a thread he clung to, one he knew could unravel everything. He began to fix the church roof alone, under the cover of night, attaching plank by plank until the whole building began to look whole again. He did not want the village's eyes on him while he repaired what he felt he had helped to break, not with tools, but with the spirit of theft. He wanted to give without receiving credit, to be the kind of man who risked nothing but still gave everything he had. Yet, each nail he hammered seemed to shout his secret, and the old boards seemed to remember every hand that had ever touched them. Rumor, in a small town, is the fastest runner of all. The old church started to look new, and people came to see. The story of the mysterious new roof spread like the scent of frying cassava. Some remembered the boy from Greenhill, and the whispers started again, curling through the market like smoke. Others felt only a sense of wonder. When the day came for the church to be dedicated at Easter, the village turned out in their best clothes, their old hurts and curiosities pressed into their pockets like smooth stones. Daniel felt the weight of that day like a physical hand on his shoulders. He was proud of the work but sick with fear of the truth. As the church bell rang, a slow hush fell over the crowd. Daniel's hands, so steady with a hammer, trembled at his sides. He watched the faces, those he had stolen from in another life, those he had ignored, and those who had welcomed a stranger without a past. When Pastor John stood before the people, he did not name the man who had done the work. He said only that light often comes from those who have known the deepest darkness and have chosen to carry a lamp. Then he spoke of finding a humble man at his gate, a man who called himself Chris, who had worked without asking for notice or reward. The crowd murmured with curiosity and soft approval. And then the air caught. A voice from the back of the church, clear and firm, called out his true name. Daniel. The word was like cold water thrown on his soul. Every face turned. Memories surfaced in the eyes of the crowd. The trader from Brookfield, the man whose house had been broken into, whose newborn's peace had been shattered, stood up. He walked slowly to the front, his steps measured and heavy. A dozen people remembered the man who had raised the alarm, who had brought the mob and the storm that left Daniel tied to a tree. When the trader spoke, the sound of his voice stilled the room. He told them how, on that rain-swept night, he had watched from his window as the figure was tied to the tree. He had felt his anger war with something else, a father's pity, a stubborn, inconvenient faith. He had become the hooded figure. He had untied Daniel and led him to Oakridge. The confession exploded in the quiet church like a calabash dropped from a rooftop. People who had wanted blood that night turned their faces away, confused. Some could not fathom this twist, this mercy from the last expected source. But forgiveness, like rain, can fall where it is not expected, where it is not even earned. The trader stepped forward and looked directly at Daniel. "I give my forgiveness," he said, plain and slow. The room seemed to tremble with the shock of it. And then a miracle. One by one, others whose lives had been made thin by Daniel's axe. A woman who had lost a radio that was her only company, a man who had his wages stolen, slowly rose to do the same. It was not easy. It was not clean. But it was real. Not everyone forgave that day. Some left the church with anger still smoldering in their chests like hot coals. Some watched Daniel as if he were a storm cloud that might break at any moment. Yet, something new was there, cracking the hard crust of the past like fresh soil ready for planting. Stripped bare by the trader's mercy, Daniel stepped forward. He confessed everything he had done. He told them of the lie, the name Chris, and he spoke the name his mother had given him. The confession was not neat or eloquent. It was a stumbling, messy thing, like a child learning to walk. But it humbled him utterly, and it opened a narrow path for mercy to walk in. Forgiveness did not make everything right all at once. It did not bring back the stolen items or erase the memory of fear. But it did something the town had never seen before. It made a space where repair could begin. Daniel took the work given to him, not as a penance to be finished, but as a life to be lived. He led the boys in carpentry, taught them to plant and harvest, and kept sweeping the church at dawn as if to remind himself of his place. He became the leader of the youth team not for power, but because he needed the responsibility to tie him to his new honesty. Yet stories do not end with a single kind act. Trials came again. Word reached Oakridge that members of Daniel's old gang were alive, angry, and blaming him for their downfall. One of them, Kofi, cold and sharp like a knife that had not been oiled in years, came to pull Daniel back into the night. He wanted the gang's lost honor and their lost coin, and he would not be stopped by prayer or by Pastor John's quiet words. The threat made the whole town breathe tighter. Daniel had to decide: run and hide back into the old ways, or stand and risk destroying the new life he had built. When Kofi and his men came, they did not come in the night like thieves. They came in the heat of noon, when the market was full and the town was busy, confident and brazen. They tried to drag Daniel back to the life he had fled. The struggle spilled out near the river, where children were playing and women were washing clothes. A woman's shriek split the air. Daniel did not run. He fought with a strength that surprised even him. But he did not fight to take, he fought to protect. He fought for the simple peace he had found, for the boys who looked up to him, for the second chance he had been given. In the end, Kofi fled, wounded more in his pride than in his body. The town saw Daniel standing there, chest heaving, not as a thief who had returned to his old ways, but as a man who would stand and fight for something else. Anna, who had watched him from the start, was torn. She had seen his lies. She had also seen him quietly fix a roof and teach children to saw and plane wood with patience. She confronted him one final time, demanding the whole truth. Daniel could have run again. He could have lied. Instead, he told her everything. Not all at once, but in small pieces over time, with a painful honesty. It was like driving nails into a soft board, one by one, until the board held firm and true. Anna cried once, not with anger, but with the grief of someone who finally sees the depth of a soul trying to mend itself. As Daniel opened himself, more of the town's buried stories began to surface. The name Thomas, from the brown bag, led him to an old neighborhood, to an elderly woman who remembered the man who had died heartbroken after being robbed. Daniel went to her, knelt in the dust before her, and asked for forgiveness with the humility of a man finally stripped of all his pride. The woman looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. She pressed the back of his hand and said, "My son, if a man wants to be fixed, let him work." The words became a silent oath for Daniel. He kept working. He kept teaching. He kept his head down. One evening, the trader from Brookfield visited him in private. He told Daniel why he had really untied him that night. He spoke of his own past losses, of a mercy he himself had once received in a moment of despair. He told Daniel that saving him had nothing to do with forgetting the hurt, and everything to do with not letting the town be destroyed by its own endless cycle of anger and retribution. The trader's face showed old scars, and his voice carried the weight of his years. He said to Daniel, softly, "You must learn to be more than the sum of your mistakes." There were other tests. A season of poor rain came, and the harvest threatened to fail. Daniel organized the boys and men, dug a new well, repaired old irrigation ditches, and taught young farmers ways to save every drop of water. The town watched as the young man who had once stolen now led them to water. He did not ask for reward. He asked only for a chance to serve. Little by little, people began to trust him. Not because his words said so, but because his work showed so. The boys he taught built homes and planted trees. They learned to answer a man with honesty, and the town learned to answer with a slow, hard-won trust. Anna came to see him differently. She found him early one morning sweeping the church courtyard, the air cool and the dust rising like pale gold in the sunrise. She spoke with him, not as a judge, but as someone who had decided to believe in the possibility of change. They spoke of small things, a bowl he had fixed for her, a ladder he had mended, and of the past in careful, quiet sentences. Daniel's face, when he spoke of his mother, softened like a river finally finding its true bed. Anna listened and she forgave him. Not because she had to, but because she had come to know the man he was becoming. The small, careful friendship between them grew like new green shoots after a fire has burned a field clean. Time moved with steady patience. Some of Daniel's old gang members came back, bent and broken, tired of running. One joined Daniel's workshops, finding a different kind of strength in building. Another refused the offer and left, disappearing back into the shadows. Kofi never returned. The town's memory of Daniel shifted slowly, not in one great moment of forgiveness, but in 1,000 small ones. A neighbor lending a cup of rice, a child being invited to learn a trade, an old man being given a seat in the shade. Daniel became a story parents used to teach their children that people are not frozen in their worst moments, that they can change. He still swept the church at dawn. He still mended roofs. But he also helped teach boys to read the signs of an honest market, to understand the dignity of hard work, and to respect the community that raised them. Some nights, Daniel sat by the river. He had learned that a person is always more than the worst thing they have ever done, and that mercy is not a weakness, but the strongest force there is. He kept the memory of the brown bag like a stone in his pocket, a heavy, useful reminder of the weight of what he had taken, and of what he could give back. In time, the town found a new rhythm. The townspeople still grumbled now and then. No community is made of only saints, but there was a new layer of patience where only fear had been before. Daniel's life became a living story that people told at night when the fires burned low, the tale of the thief who had learned to turn his hands to honesty. When the next harmattan came and the dust from the Sahara turned the sky a thin, beautiful gold, Daniel's story had already changed the town. He was not a perfect man. He still had nights when the old hunger knocked on his chest, a ghost of the past. But he had learned to answer it not with taking, but with work, with giving, and with the small mercy he himself had been shown. Pastor John would say at times, "Grace is for the unworthy," and Daniel would nod, because now he understood it in his bones. And so the tale finds its resting place, where the town keeps the memory of what was and what became. Daniel's life is told as both a warning and a promise, that even the most broken among us can be remade by steady hands, stubborn mercy, and the courage to choose a different path. Told wherever children sat and grew, learning that no one, no matter how far they have fallen, is ever beyond the reach of grace.